My name is Jack Monroe, and I'm 44 years old. The road is a lonely place, but it's a loneliness you get used to. It becomes a kind of companion, a low hum in the background of your life. For 20 years, I've been a long-haul trucker, and that hum has been the soundtrack to my days and nights. I've seen every sunrise and sunset this country has to offer, from the fiery skies over the painted desert to the misty dawns in the Appalachians. I've learned the rhythms of the highway, the personalities of different states, the unspoken rules of the road. I've also learned that some places feel wrong. They have a stillness that isn't peaceful, a silence that isn't calm. Rest stops, in particular, can be pockets of profound strangeness, little islands of asphalt where the normal rules of the world seem to bend. But nothing in my 2 decades of driving could have prepared me for what happened in the heart of the Arizona desert at a rest stop that felt like the last outpost of humanity. It was late August, the kind of heat that doesn't break even after the sun goes down. The air conditioner in my Kenworth was fighting a losing battle, and the air in the cab was thick and stale. I was on a cross-country run from California to Texas, hauling a load of consumer electronics. The miles had been long, and my eyelids felt like they had lead weights attached to them. The digital clock on my dash glowed a menacing red 2:13 a.m. I'd been pushing it, trying to make good time, but my body was screaming for rest. Up ahead, a sign materialized out of the darkness, its green reflective paint catching my headlights. Rest area 1 mile. It was an oasis in a sea of black, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The turnoff was a simple, unlit ramp that descended into an even deeper darkness. The rest stop itself was a small, desolate affair. A single, squat brick building housed the restrooms, its windows dark and unwelcoming. A few picnic tables were scattered like forgotten toys under the sickly yellow glow of a single, sputtering sodium lamp. The parking lot was vast and empty, save for one other rig parked at the far end, its outline barely visible against the star-dusted sky. I steered my truck into a spot far from the other driver, a habit born from a desire for privacy and quiet. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was immense, broken only by the faint, high-pitched whine of insects and the distant rumble of a passing truck on the interstate. The air outside was surprisingly cool, a welcome respite from the stuffy cab. I stretched my legs, my boots crunching on the loose gravel. The sky above was a spectacle, a brilliant tapestry of stars that you only get to see in the middle of nowhere, far from the light pollution of cities. For a moment, I felt a sense of peace. It was just me, my truck, and the vast, silent desert. I did my usual walk around, checking my tires and my load, the familiar ritual, a comfort in the unfamiliar darkness. Everything was secure. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and drew the heavy curtains over the windows, cocooning myself in my own little world. Sleep came quickly, a heavy, dreamless slumber that pulled me down into its depths. I don't know how long I was out. It could have been minutes or hours. What woke me was a sound, a small, precise sound that didn't belong in the symphony of the desert night. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the driver's side window right next to my head. My eyes snapped open in the pitch-black cab. I lay perfectly still, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. My first thought was that it was the other trucker, maybe needing help or a light, but the sound was too delicate, too light for a grown man's knuckle. Tap, tap, tap. It was rhythmic, insistent. I held my breath, straining my ears. The sound stopped. I waited, every nerve ending on fire. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. I started to relax, telling myself it was just a branch or maybe the truck settling. The desert plays tricks on you. The wind can sound like a whisper, a coyote's howl can sound like a scream. I was just tired, my mind playing games. I closed my eyes, trying to will myself back to sleep. And then it came again. Louder this time, more urgent. Tap, 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 tap. It was faster now, a frantic, desperate little rhythm against the glass. This was no branch. This was deliberate. My blood ran cold. I was parked in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. The other truck was 100 yards away. Who could possibly be out there? Slowly, carefully, I reached for the edge of the curtain. My hand was trembling. I told myself to be rational. It was probably just some kids, a prank. But at this hour, in this place, it didn't feel right. My gut was screaming at me, a primal alarm bell that I had learned to trust over the years. With a deep breath, I pulled the curtain back just a fraction of an inch, creating a tiny slit to peer through. The yellow sodium lamp cast long, distorted shadows across the parking lot. The brick restroom building was a dark monolith. The other truck was a silent giant. There was nothing else, no one, just the empty, desolate space between my truck and the edge of the desert. I scanned the area, my eyes darting back and forth. Nothing. I let the curtain fall back into place, my heart still pounding. Was I losing my mind? Had I dreamed it? The sound had been so real, so close. I sat there in the darkness for what felt like an eternity, listening. The only sound was the blood rushing in my ears. I was about to lie back down to dismiss it as a figment of an overtired imagination when I saw it. It wasn't something I saw through the window. It was on the window itself. In the faint, ambient light filtering through the thin curtain, a shape was beginning to form on the glass. It was a smear, a greasy, translucent mark. As my eyes adjusted, I could see the distinct shape of a hand. It was small, impossibly small, the size of a young child's hand. The palm was pressed flat against the glass, the fingers splayed out. It was as if someone was on the outside, their hand pressed against the window, trying to see in. But there was no one there. I had just looked. I stared at the handprint, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. It was wet, dewy, as if it had just been made. I could see the delicate lines of the palm, the tiny pads of the fingertips. It was a perfect, ghostly impression. My breath hitched in my throat. I wanted to scream, to start the engine and get the hell out of there, but I was frozen, paralyzed by a fear so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on me. Then another handprint appeared. It materialized out of nowhere, right next to the first one. Another small, perfect hand pressed against the glass. Then another and another appearing in rapid succession, spreading across the window like a rash. They were all child-sized, all wet and glistening in the faint light. Some were smeared as if a small hand had slid down the glass. The tapping started again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just at my window, it was all around me. Tapping on the passenger side window, on the windshield, on the roof of the cab. A frantic, chaotic percussion, a dozen tiny hands drumming on my metal cocoon, trying to get in. Tap, 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 tap. It was a cacophony of tiny, insistent noises, a sound that should have been innocent but was now the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands over my ears, but I couldn't block it out. The sound was inside my head, a frantic, desperate plea from a chorus of unseen children. I was no longer just scared. I was in the grip of a primal, mind-shattering terror. The stories you hear from other drivers, the ghost stories told over cups of stale coffee at 3 a.m., they were all flooding back to me. The ghost of the little girl on Highway 80, the phantom headlights that chase you down lonely roads. I had always dismissed them as tall tales, the product of too much caffeine and not enough sleep. But now, I was living one. The tapping grew more frantic, more desperate. It was no longer just tapping, it was scraping, The sound of tiny fingernails dragging down the glass, a sound that set my teeth on edge and sent shivers down my spine. I could almost feel the pressure of their hands, the coldness of their touch seeping through the glass. I had to get out. I had to move. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged for the ignition. My hand was slick with sweat, and I fumbled with the keys. The tapping stopped. The sudden silence was even more terrifying than the noise. I held my breath, listening. Nothing. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a deafening, beautiful sound that shattered the stillness of the night. I didn't hesitate. I threw the truck into gear, my foot slamming down on the accelerator. The tires squealed on the pavement as I pulled out of the parking spot, the big rig lurching forward like a startled beast. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I pointed the nose of my truck towards the highway and drove. I didn't care about my route, my schedule, my load. All I cared about was putting as much distance as possible between me and that God-forsaken place. As I merged back onto the interstate, the first rays of dawn were beginning to break over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The light was a balm to my frayed nerves, a promise of safety and sanity. I drove for another hour, my eyes glued to the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Finally, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, I pulled over onto the shoulder. My heart was still racing, but the terror was beginning to subside, replaced by a trembling, exhausted disbelief. I needed to know. I needed to see. I got out of the cab, the morning air cool and clean. I walked around to the driver's side, my steps hesitant. I stopped and stared at the window. It was covered in them. Dozens of tiny, perfect handprints smeared and overlapping from the top of the window to the bottom. They were exactly as I had seen them in the dark, greasy and translucent. But now, in the clear light of day, they were undeniably real. I reached out a trembling finger and touched one of the prints. It was cold and clammy with a strange, oily residue that I couldn't identify. I recoiled, a fresh wave of nausea washing over me. I spent the next hour at a truck wash, scrubbing my rig from top to bottom, trying to erase the memory of what had happened. But even as the soap and water washed away the physical evidence, the image of those little hands, the sound of that frantic tapping was burned into my mind. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? They'd say I was drunk or high or just plain crazy. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know that I will never ever stop at a deserted rest stop in the middle of the night again. The road is a lonely place, but now I know that sometimes you're not as alone as you think. Sometimes there are things out there in the darkness, things that are lost and lonely and want to come in. And they'll just keep tapping, hoping you'll let them. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like this video. And now, let's begin our next terrifying tale. My name is Curtis Dawson, but everyone calls me Red. I'm 51. They call me Red, partly because of my hair, which used to be a fiery auburn before it faded to a kind of rusty gray, and partly because of a temper I had in my younger days. That temper has softened over 30 years of driving, smoothed out by the endless miles of asphalt and the solitude that comes with the job. You learn to be patient on the road. You learn to be observant. You learn that the world is a lot bigger and stranger than most people think. Most of the strangeness is harmless. The oddball you meet at a diner, the weird shapes the clouds make over the plains of Nebraska. But sometimes you stumble into a pocket of strangeness that's different. It's a cold, dark strangeness, and it sticks to you like road grime. That's what happened to me one sweltering night in East Texas at a rest stop that felt like it was sitting on the edge of the world. I was hauling a load of lumber from Arkansas down to a construction site in Houston. It was a miserable night, the air so thick with humidity you could practically swim in it. The sky was a bruised purple and lightning flickered on the horizon too far away to hear the thunder. It was the kind of weather that makes your skin feel sticky and your thoughts turn sour. I'd been driving for 10 hours straight and my back was a knot of angry muscle. The coffee I'd been chugging for the last 100 miles had turned on me, and my bladder was screaming for relief. Just past Texarkana, I saw the familiar blue sign for a rest area. It wasn't much, just a small functional brick building and a few parking spots, but to me, it was the Ritz-Carlton. I pulled my Peterbilt off the highway, the hiss of the air brakes sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet night. The parking lot was mostly empty. A couple of cars were parked near the front, probably families trying to sleep off a long day of travel. A lone sedan sat under one of the few working lights, its windows fogged up. I found a spot at the back, away from everyone else, and shut down the engine. The moment I stepped out of the cab, the humidity hit me like a physical blow. The air was buzzing with the sound of cicadas, a relentless, high-pitched drone that seemed to vibrate in my bones. The restroom building was about 50 yards away, its entrance lit by a single, fly-specked fluorescent light that flickered erratically. It cast a pale, sickly glow on the concrete walkway. As I walked towards the building, a feeling of unease began to creep over me. It was a subtle thing, a prickling on the back of my neck. The place just felt off. The air was heavy, not just with moisture, but with a kind of oppressive stillness. The cicadas buzzed, the light flickered, but underneath it all was a silence that felt ancient and wrong. I shook my head, telling myself I was just tired and spooked by the storm. I'm a big guy, 6'3" and built like a lumberjack. I'm not the kind of man who gets scared of shadows. I pushed open the heavy metal door to the men's room. The smell hit me first, a cloying mix of stale urine, cheap disinfectant, and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet like old pennies. The room was tiled in a grimy, pale green, the grout stained dark with years of filth. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed and buzzed, casting everything in a harsh, unflattering light. The sinks were stained, the mirrors were clouded with age. It was your typical run-down rest stop bathroom, a place you wanted to get in and out of as quickly as possible. The room was empty, or so I thought. There were 4 stalls, the doors made of that cheap, painted metal. The first 3 were open, revealing their stained and sorry interiors. The door to the last stall at the far end of the room was closed. I didn't think much of it. I was just glad I didn't have to wait. I went to the urinal, my mind already back on the road, calculating the miles to Houston. As I stood there, I heard a sound from the closed stall. It was a soft sound, almost inaudible over the buzzing of the lights. A sniffle, a choked, wet sound, like someone trying to cry without making any noise. I paused, listening. It came again, a little louder this time, a hitching, ragged breath followed by a low, mournful sob. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated misery. My first instinct was sympathy. Maybe the guy had gotten some bad news. A call from home, a Dear John letter. Or maybe he was sick. The road can be a lonely, heartbreaking place. I've had my own moments of despair in cheap motel rooms and desolate parking lots. "Hey, buddy," I said, my voice a little too loud in the tiled room. "You all right in there?" There was no answer. The only sound was the continued heartbreaking sobbing. It was a strange sound, raw and full of a pain that felt deeper than any normal human sadness. It had a hollow, echoing quality, as if it were coming from a great distance. I finished up and went to the sink to wash my hands. The sobbing continued, a steady, rhythmic expression of grief. It was starting to get under my skin. The sound was just so desolate. It felt wrong. "Look, man," I said, drying my hands on a rough paper towel. "If you need help, you gotta say something. I can call someone if you need me to." Silence. The sobbing stopped. For a moment I thought he had finally gotten a hold of himself. The silence stretched on, and the oppressive feeling in the room intensified. The air grew thick and cold. I could feel the hairs on my arms stand up. I stood there frozen, my hand hovering over the trash can. I didn't want to leave, not with someone in that much pain. But I also had a powerful primal urge to get the hell out of that room. Something was very, very wrong. My gaze drifted down to the floor. The stall doors were raised a good foot off the ground, a design I'd never understood. From where I was standing, I could see the floor of the last stall. I could see the grimy, green tiles, the dark grout lines. And that's when the fear, true and cold, sank its teeth into me. There were no shoes. There were no feet. No pants cuffs pooled around ankles. No sign of a human being in that stall. The space beneath the door was completely empty. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe he was standing on the toilet, but why? And how could he be making that sobbing sound if he was perched up there? It didn't make any sense. The sobbing had stopped, but I had the distinct chilling feeling that I was being watched. The silence from the stall was no longer empty, it was heavy, expectant. It was the silence of a predator. Against my better judgment, I took a step closer. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I crouched down slowly, my old knees protesting. I leaned forward, peering into the gap under the stall door. The first thing I saw were the shadows. The buzzing fluorescent lights from above cast long, dark shapes across the floor. The shadow of the toilet, the shadow of the partition walls. But there was another shadow, one that didn't belong. It was in the center of the stall, a deep, inky blackness that seemed to absorb the light around it. It wasn't a normal shadow, it had a substance to it, a three-dimensional quality that made my stomach clench. It was a formless, shifting mass of darkness, and as I watched, it began to stretch. It elongated, flowing across the tiles like a spill of black oil. It stretched out from the center of the stall, moving towards the gap under the door. It moved with a silent, unnatural fluidity, a living, breathing piece of night. It was coming towards me. I scrambled backwards, my boots slipping on the grimy floor. I fell, my hand landing in something wet and sticky. I didn't care. I crab-walked away, my eyes locked on the space under the door. The shadow was still coming, stretching, reaching for me. It was almost to the door. I heard a sound then, a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. It wasn't a sob. It was a low, guttural chuckle that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. It was a sound of ancient, malevolent amusement. It was the sound of a spider watching a fly struggle in its web. I didn't wait to hear any more. I scrambled to my feet and ran. I burst through the restroom door and into the humid night air, gasping for breath. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my cab. I fumbled with the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get it open. I threw myself inside and slammed the lock. I sat there panting, my heart feeling like it was going to explode out of my chest. I stared at the restroom building, its flickering light now looking like a beacon of pure evil. I expected to see something, a figure emerging from the door, a shape moving in the darkness. But there was nothing, just the buzzing of the cicadas and the oppressive, watchful silence. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in my cab, watching the restroom until the sun came up. The first light of dawn felt like a blessing, a physical cleansing of the evil that had saturated the night. As soon as it was light enough to see, I started my engine and got the hell out of there. I've been driving for 30 years. I've seen it all. But I've never been able to explain what I saw that night. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a man, it was something else. Something old and dark and hungry. And it lives in the forgotten corners of the world, in the places we pass through without a second thought. It waits in the silence, in the shadows, and it weeps with a sorrow that is not of this world, waiting for someone to come looking. I was lucky. I looked, but I didn't stay, and I will carry the memory of that empty stall and the shadow that stretched across the tiles with me for the rest of my days. My name is Luis Ortega, and I'm 38. I've been driving a flatbed for about 15 years, mostly running routes through the Southwest. I haul construction materials, heavy machinery, things that build the world up. I like the desert. A lot of drivers hate it, they call it empty, boring. But I find a kind of peace in it. The sheer scale of it, the way the landscape stretches out to the horizon, it puts things in perspective. It makes you feel small, but in a good way. It reminds you that you're just a small part of something much, much bigger. But one night in New Mexico, the desert showed me a different side of itself. It showed me that empty doesn't always mean there's nothing there. Sometimes it means there's something you can't see. I was on my way to Albuquerque with a load of steel beams. It was a clear, cool night in early October. The kind of night where the stars are so bright they look like holes punched in a black velvet sky. I was making good time, the Cummins engine of my rig purring along, the miles rolling by under my wheels. But I was tired. My eyes were gritty and my focus was starting to drift. I knew the signs. Pushing it when you're tired is a fool's game, and I'm no fool. I saw a sign for a rest stop ahead. It wasn't one of the big fancy ones with a welcome center and vending machines. It was just a simple pull-off, a gravel lot with a couple of sun-bleached picnic tables and a single unlit restroom building. It was perched on the edge of a mesa, overlooking a vast, dark valley. It was the kind of place that was probably beautiful in the daytime, but at night it felt like the edge of the world. I pulled in, my headlights sweeping across the deserted lot. The place was completely empty, not another soul in sight. I parked my rig at the far end of the lot, positioning it so I'd have a clear view of the entrance and the highway beyond. It's a habit, a way of staying aware of your surroundings. You never know who or what might wander in off the highway in the middle of the night. I killed the engine and the silence descended. It was a profound silence, the kind you only find deep in the desert. No crickets, no wind, just the low hum of my own nervous system. I decided to stretch my legs before I tried to get some sleep. I grabbed my big mag light from the door pocket and hopped out of the cab. The air was crisp and cold, and it felt good to breathe it in after the stale air of the cab. I did my usual walk around, checking the tires, the straps on my load. Everything was solid. As I was finishing my check, I heard the sound of an engine. It was a low, rumbling sound, and it was getting closer. I looked towards the entrance and saw a pair of headlights turn off the highway and into the lot. It was an old pickup truck. A Ford, maybe from the late 70s or early 80s. It was a beater, the body a patchwork of rust and faded primer. It chugged into the lot, its engine sputtering and coughing like an old man with a bad chest. It pulled into a spot about 50 feet away from me, its headlights cutting a swath through the darkness before the driver killed the engine. The silence returned even deeper than before. I stood there for a minute, watching the truck. I couldn't see the driver through the grimy windshield. No one got out. The truck just sat there, a dark, silent shape in the moonlight. I figured it was just another tired traveler, someone like me looking for a place to rest their head for a few hours. I gave a little wave in the direction of the truck, a silent acknowledgement of our shared solitude, and then climbed back into my cab. I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and settled into my sleeper berth. I was tired, but for some reason I couldn't sleep. I was restless. My mind kept going back to that old pickup truck. There was something about it that was bothering me, something I couldn't put my finger on. It was just still. Too still. I lay there for what felt like an hour, listening to the silence. I didn't hear a door open or close. I didn't hear footsteps on the gravel. The truck was as silent as a tomb. I started to feel a little uneasy. It's not unusual for people to sleep in their cars at rest stops, but usually there's some sign of life. A cough, a rustle, the flicker of a lighter. From that truck, there was nothing. Finally, my curiosity got the better of me. I got up and peeked through a gap in the curtains. The truck was still there, a dark, hulking shape under the moonlight. The rest stop was as empty and silent as before. I watched it for a long time, waiting for something to happen. A light to go on, a door to open, nothing. I was starting to feel foolish. It was just a truck. I was letting my imagination get the better of me. I was about to go back to bed when I decided I needed some fresh air. Maybe a short walk would clear my head and help me sleep. I quietly opened the cab door and slipped out, trying not to make any noise. The cold air felt good, on my face. I stood by my rig, my eyes fixed on the old pickup. It was just as I had seen it from my window, a silent, dark mass. But as I looked at it, I noticed something strange. The moonlight was bright, casting sharp, clear shadows. My own rig cast a long, dark shadow on the gravel. The picnic tables cast shadows. The restroom building cast a shadow. The pickup truck did not. I stared, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The truck was there, a solid three-dimensional object. I could see the rust patches, the dented fender, the cracked windshield. But the ground beneath and around it was bathed in the same even silvery moonlight as the rest of the empty lot. It was as if the truck was a photograph, a two-dimensional image pasted onto the landscape. I took a step forward, my heart starting to beat a little faster. This was impossible. It had to be a trick of the light, an optical illusion. I took another step, and another, my eyes never leaving the truck. As I got closer, the feeling of wrongness intensified. The air around the truck felt cold, dead. The silence was different here, heavier. I was about 20 feet away when I stopped. I could see the truck clearly now. It was real. It was solid. But the lack of a shadow was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It violated the laws of physics, the basic rules of how the world works. I stood there, frozen, a cold dread creeping up my spine. I had the sudden, overwhelming feeling that I was looking at something that wasn't supposed to be here, something that was out of place, out of time. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like an eternity. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I wanted to run, to get back in my truck and drive away. But I was also mesmerized, unable to look away from this impossible sight. Then I blinked. It was just a normal blink, a split second of darkness. But when my eyes opened, the truck was gone. One moment it was there, a solid, rusty, impossible presence. The next, there was nothing. Just an empty patch of gravel shimmering in the moonlight. I stared at the empty space, my mouth hanging open. It hadn't driven away. I would have heard the engine, seen the headlights. It hadn't been towed. It had simply vanished, ceased to exist. I stood there for a full minute, my mind reeling. I was wide awake now, the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I walked over to the spot where the truck had been. I half expected the ground to be different, colder, or to find some strange mark or symbol. But there was nothing. Just gravel. Then I saw them. Tire tracks. They were fresh, clear, and deep in the loose gravel. 2 parallel tracks leading into the spot where the truck had been parked, and 2 parallel tracks leading out. They were the tracks of a heavy vehicle, the kind an old pickup truck would make. They were undeniably physically real. I followed the tracks leading out. They went straight for about 30 feet, and then they just stopped. They didn't fade away, they didn't turn, they just ended as if the truck had been lifted straight up into the sky. I stood at the end of the tracks, looking out at the empty desert. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was menacing. The vast, empty space no longer felt like a comfort. It felt like a threat. I didn't sleep that night. I got back in my truck, locked the doors, and sat there with my mag light in my hand until the sun came up. I watched the spot where the truck had been, half expecting it to reappear. It never did. As soon as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, I started my engine and left. I didn't look back. I drove all the way to Albuquerque without stopping. The image of the vanishing truck burned into my mind. I've tried to explain it to myself 100 times. I was tired. I was hallucinating. I fell asleep on my feet and dreamed it. But I can't explain the tire tracks. They were real. I saw them. I touched them. The desert is a strange place. It's full of secrets. I think that night I stumbled upon one of them. I saw something that wasn't meant for me to see, a brief glimpse into a world that operates by a different set of rules. A world where things can exist without casting a shadow, and where a rusty old pickup truck can vanish into thin air, leaving nothing behind but a few impossible tracks in the dust and a memory that will haunt me forever. I still love the desert, but now when I look out at its vast, empty spaces, I do it with a little more respect and a lot more fear. Because I know that empty is just a matter of perception. And sometimes the things you can't see are the most real things of all. If this story gave you chills, smash the like button and drop a comment below. Another horrifying tale is waiting. Let's continue. My name is Mike Turner and I'm 29. I'm what they call a new school trucker. I've got a podcast I listen to and my cab is probably cleaner than most people's apartments. I got into this business about 5 years ago, not out of family tradition, but because I craved the open road, the sense of freedom. I romanticized it, I guess. I pictured myself as a modern-day cowboy riding my steel horse across the plains. For the most part, it's lived up to the hype, but the road has a way of stripping away the romance and showing you its true face. It's not always sunsets and open highways. Sometimes it's a lonely, flickering light in the middle of nowhere and a feeling so cold it has nothing to do with the temperature. This happened a couple of years back. I was on a dedicated route, hauling produce from the Central Valley of California to distribution centers in the Mountain West. It was a routine run, one I'd done a dozen times. This particular leg had me cutting across Nevada on US 95, a stretch of road so straight and desolate it feels like you're driving on a treadmill. It was late, probably around 1 a.m. The desert night was cool and clear, and the monotony of the drive was starting to get to me. My eyes were burning, and I was craving something cold and sugary to shock my system back to life. Up ahead, I saw the blessed blue sign, Rest Area. This one was a bit more substantial than the usual gravel pull-offs. It had a proper building, a well-lit parking lot, and a bank of vending machines set into an exterior wall. Perfect. I pulled my rig in, the air brakes sighing as I came to a stop. The lot was surprisingly bright, lit by tall, powerful lamps that bathed the asphalt in a clean, white light. It felt safe, sterile even. There were a few other cars scattered around and another semi parked on the far side of the lot. I hopped out of the cab, grabbing a few crumpled dollar bills from my console. The air was still and quiet. The only sound, the low hum of the vending machine's compressors. I walked towards them, my boots echoing slightly in the silence. The machines were lined up against the main building, 2 for sodas, 1 for snacks, 1 for coffee. They glowed with an inviting, artificial light, a beacon of civilization in the vast, dark desert. I was fumbling with a wrinkled dollar bill, trying to feed it into the slot of the soda machine when I felt it. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. It's a primal feeling, one that bypasses logic and goes straight to your gut. I paused, the dollar halfway into the machine, and slowly looked up. Standing about 30 feet away near the edge of the light's reach was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 or 11 years old. She was just standing there, partially obscured by the shadow of a concrete picnic table, watching me. She was wearing a simple, light-colored dress that looked thin and out of place in the cool night air. Her hair was long and dark, and her face was pale, almost luminous in the stark white light. My first thought was, what is a kid doing out here by herself at this hour? My mind immediately jumped to the worst-case scenarios. Had she been left behind? Was her family in one of the cars and she'd just wandered out? Was she in trouble? I pulled the dollar bill back out of the machine and took a step in her direction. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out. My voice sounded loud in the quiet lot. "Are your parents around?" She didn't answer. She didn't move. She just continued to stare at me. Her eyes were large and dark, and her expression was completely blank. There was no fear, no curiosity, no emotion at all. It was like looking at a doll's face. The stillness of her was what started to unnerve me. Kids fidget. They shift their weight. They look around. This girl was as still as a statue. "Is everything all right?" I tried again, taking another step. "Do you need help?" A car passed on the highway, its headlights sweeping across the rest stop for a brief moment. In that flash of light, I saw her more clearly. Her dress wasn't just light-colored, it was old-fashioned, like something out of a photograph from the 1950s. Her skin was so pale it looked almost translucent, and her eyes were dark pools in her small face. The feeling of wrongness intensified, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. I stopped walking towards her. Something was telling me not to get any closer. The logical part of my brain was screaming that this was a child who needed help, but every instinct I had was screaming that this was something else entirely. I decided to try a different approach. I turned back to the vending machine, pretending to be occupied with my purchase. I figured if I broke eye contact, maybe she would either leave or say something. I kept her in my peripheral vision as I smoothed out the dollar bill and fed it into the machine again. This time, it took. I pressed the button for a Coke and the machine whirred to life. A can clattered down into the dispenser. My hand was trembling as I reached down to get my drink. The whole time, I could feel her eyes on me. It was a heavy physical pressure. I stood up, the cold can a small comfort in my hand. I took a deep breath and glanced back to where she had been standing. She was gone. The spot by the picnic table was empty. I scanned the parking lot, my eyes darting into the shadows. Nothing. She couldn't have just run off. I would have heard her footsteps on the gravel. I would have seen the movement. It was as if she had simply dissolved into the night air. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it made me dizzy. I leaned against the vending machine, my heart pounding. "Okay, Mike," I muttered to myself. "You're officially losing it. Too many hours on the road." I was convinced I had imagined her, a waking dream brought on by exhaustion and too much caffeine. I popped the top of the can, the fizzing sound a welcome dose of normalcy. I took a long drink, the cold, sugary liquid a shock to my system. I was starting to feel human again. I chuckled to myself, feeling foolish. A ghost girl in a brightly lit rest stop. It was ridiculous. I pushed myself off the machine and turned to head back to my truck. As I turned, my eyes swept across the bank of vending machines. The glass fronts of the machines were dark, reflecting the parking lot behind me like a series of black mirrors. I could see the reflection of my truck, the reflection of the other cars, the reflection of the bright lights overhead. And I saw her. She was there, in the reflection, not behind me where she should have been to cast a reflection. She was in the glass. Her pale, still face was looking out at me from the dark surface of the snack machine. Her image was as clear and solid as my own. But when I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, there was nothing there. The parking lot was empty. I whipped my head back to the vending machine. She was still there, her reflection, staring at me with those blank, dark eyes. Her image was in the glass of the snack machine and the coffee machine and the other soda machine. A row of identical, silent, staring girls, all looking out at me from a world behind the glass. I was paralyzed, my feet rooted to the spot. My can of soda slipped from my hand and clattered to the ground, the dark liquid spreading across the pavement. I couldn't breathe. My mind was screaming, but I couldn't make a sound. The reflection in the glass began to change. The girl's blank expression slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to shift. The corners of her mouth twitched, and then, with an agonizing slowness, her lips began to pull back from her teeth into a smile. It was not a child's smile. It was a wide, predatory grin full of an ancient, knowing malice. It was a smile that said, "I see you. I know you're real, and you know I'm not." That smile broke the spell. A strangled cry escaped my lips, and I stumbled backwards, away from the machines, away from that impossible, horrifying face. I tripped over my own feet and fell hard onto the asphalt, scraping my hands and knees. I didn't care. I scrambled away, crab-walking backwards, my eyes still locked on the vending machines. Her smiling face was still there in every pane of glass, watching me. I got to my feet and ran. I ran like I had never run before, a raw animal panic propelling me forward. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. I hauled myself into the cab, slammed the door, and fumbled with the locks. I was sobbing, gasping for air, my body shaking uncontrollably. I didn't dare look back. I jammed the key into the ignition and started the engine. I didn't even do my usual checks. I just threw the truck into gear and stomped on the accelerator. I tore out of that rest stop, my tires squealing in protest. I drove for 2 hours straight, my eyes wide, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I didn't look in my rearview mirror. I was terrified of what I might see. I drove until the sun came up, until the harsh light of day chased away the last of the shadows. I've never been back to that rest stop. I take a different route now, even though it adds hours to my trip. I can't bring myself to go back. I can't get the image of her face out of my head, the pale skin, the dark eyes, the slow, terrible smile. I don't know what I saw that night. A ghost? A hallucination? Some kind of psychic echo left behind in that lonely place? I don't have an answer, but I know this. Sometimes when I'm walking past a dark window or a polished surface, I feel a flicker of that same cold dread. And for a split second, I'm afraid to look at my own reflection, terrified that I'll see her face looking back at me, smiling that awful, knowing smile. The road is full of reflections, and I'm no longer sure what's real and what's just a memory waiting in the glass. My name is Henry Watson, and I'm 47. I'm a creature of habit. For the past 25 years, I've driven the same route, hauling grain from the farms of Kansas to the silos in Missouri. I know every curve in the road, every pothole, every landmark. I know which diners have the best coffee and which truck stops have the cleanest showers. My world is a predictable loop, and I like it that way. Predictability is safety, it's comfort. But the thing about a loop is that even a small change, a tiny deviation, can throw the whole thing off. One night, just outside of Topeka, I saw something that didn't belong in my predictable world. It was a brief, fleeting glimpse of something so wrong, so unnatural, that it shattered my sense of safety forever. It was a cool, clear night in late autumn. The harvest was in, and I was on my last run of the season. The moon was a brilliant, full orb in the sky, so bright it washed out the stars and bathed the landscape in a pale, silvery light. It was beautiful, in a stark, lonely kind of way. The fields on either side of the highway were bare, the cornstalks cut down to stubble. The world looked empty and clean. I was feeling good, relaxed. I was ahead of schedule, and the thought of being home with my family the next day had put a spring in my step. I decided to pull into a small, familiar rest stop for a quick break. It was a simple place, just a gravel lot, a small restroom building, and a line of trees that separated it from the surrounding farmland. I'd stopped there 100 times before. It was a comfortable, known quantity. I parked my rig, killed the engine, and stepped out into the crisp night air. The moonlight was so bright it was almost like daylight, but a strange, colorless version of it. Every detail was sharp and clear, the texture of the gravel, the peeling paint on the picnic tables, the dark, jagged line of the trees at the edge of the lot. The place was completely deserted. I stretched, my back popping in a satisfying way. I decided to take a short walk around the lot just to get the blood flowing. I walked towards the tree line, the gravel crunching under my boots. The silence was absolute. No wind, no insects, no distant traffic. It was the kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. I was about halfway to the trees when a movement caught my eye. It was over by the edge of the pavement where the gravel met the grass. At first I thought it was an animal, a coyote maybe, or a large raccoon. But it was too big for a raccoon, and it moved all wrong for a coyote. It was a figure, and it was on all fours. It was long and thin, its limbs unnaturally elongated. It was dark, a silhouette against the pale gravel, but it seemed to be hairless, its skin a dull, matte black. It was crawling, but not like an animal. It was moving with a jerky, insect-like motion, its limbs scuttling across the pavement with a speed that was deeply, fundamentally wrong. My mind struggled to categorize what I was seeing. It had the basic shape of a human, a torso, a head, 4 limbs. But the proportions were all wrong. The arms and legs were too long. The joints seemed to bend at impossible angles. And the speed. It was moving so fast, scuttling across the open space with a silent, terrifying purpose. It was like watching a spider, but a spider the size of a man. I was frozen, my feet cemented to the ground. My brain was short-circuiting, unable to process the sight before me. This thing, whatever it was not natural. It did not belong in this world. It was a violation of everything I knew about biology, about physics, about the way things are supposed to move. It crawled from the edge of the pavement, across a 20-foot stretch of open gravel, and towards the tree line. It covered the distance in a matter of seconds, its movements a blur of black limbs against the moonlit ground. And the whole time it was completely silent. There was no sound of its limbs on the gravel, no sound of breathing, no sound at all. It was a silent movie of a nightmare. As it reached the edge of the trees, it paused for a fraction of a second. It turned its head, and I felt a jolt of pure electric terror. I couldn't see its face, it was just a dark, oblong shape. But I felt it look at me. I felt its attention, its awareness, like a physical touch. It was a cold, ancient, and utterly alien intelligence. It knew I was there. It knew I had seen it. And then it was gone. It didn't run into the trees. It flowed into them, disappearing into the darkness of the tree line as if it were made of smoke. One moment it was there, a solid, terrifying presence. The next, there was nothing but the silent trees and the empty gravel. I stood there for a long time, my heart hammering against my ribs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The silence it had left behind was heavier, more menacing than before. The familiar, comfortable rest stop was now a place of profound and terrible strangeness. I backed away slowly, my eyes fixed on the spot where it had disappeared. I didn't turn my back until I reached my truck. I scrambled into the cab, my hands shaking, and locked the door. I sat there in the dark, my mind replaying the image over and over again. The long, thin limbs, the jerky, scuttling motion, the unnatural speed, the silent, knowing turn of its head. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. I started the engine, the roar of the diesel, a comforting man-made sound in the terrifying silence. I pulled out of that rest stop and got back on the highway, pushing the truck as fast as it would go. I've never stopped at that rest area again. I don't even like to look at it when I pass it in the daytime. It looks so normal, so mundane. But I know what I saw there. I know that for a few brief, terrible seconds, the veil between my predictable world and some other darker world was pulled back. I've tried to rationalize it. It was a deer, distorted by the moonlight. It was a trick of the shadows. It was a hallucination brought on by fatigue. But none of those explanations fit. None of them can account for the feeling of ancient alien intelligence I felt when it looked at me. None of them can explain the profound and fundamental wrongness of the way it moved. I'm still a creature of habit. I still drive my loop. But the comfort is gone. The safety is gone. Now, when I look out at the empty fields and the dark tree lines, I don't see peace. I see a hiding place. I see the edges of the world where the things that don't belong can slip through. And I drive a little faster, my eyes on the road, praying that I never see what's crawling in the darkness again. My name is Ben Carter, and I'm 32. There's a certain kind of trust you develop on the road, an unspoken code. You help a driver with a flat, you flash your lights to let someone know it's clear to merge. You assume, for the most part, that the other people out here are just like you, regular folks trying to make a living. You learn to read people, to get a feel for them in a short conversation at a fuel desk or over a plate of greasy eggs. But every now and then you meet someone who doesn't fit, someone who looks human but feels off, like they're wearing a costume and they haven't quite figured out how to operate it yet. I met a man like that once for all of 30 seconds, and it was the most terrifying encounter of my life. I was parked for the night at a large, busy truck stop in Southern Virginia. It was one of those massive places, a small city unto itself, with a diner, a shop, a game room, and acres of parking. It was loud and bright, a constant hub of activity. For a trucker, a place like this is usually a comfort. The noise and the lights keep the real darkness at bay. You feel anonymous, but not alone. I had just finished a long day of driving and was beat. I decided to skip the diner and just eat a sandwich in my cab. I had my curtains partially drawn, creating a little bubble of privacy, but I could still see the constant flow of trucks and people outside. It was around 10 p.m., the prime time for the truck stop, and the lot was a ballet of roaring engines and hissing air brakes. I was halfway through my sandwich listening to the radio when there was a knock on my driver's side window. It wasn't a loud, aggressive knock, just a polite, firm rap, rap, rap. I wasn't expecting anyone. I figured it was probably another driver who had gotten turned around, or maybe someone asking for a jump. I put my sandwich down and leaned over, pulling back the curtain. Standing there on the running board of my truck was a man. He was of average height and build, probably in his late 40s. He was wearing a simple, clean plaid shirt and jeans. His hair was neatly combed. He looked completely, utterly normal, except for his smile. He was smiling at me. It was a huge, wide, toothy grin that stretched his face to an unnatural degree. It was the kind of smile you see in a cartoon, a perfect gleaming white crescent, and it never wavered. It was a fixed, painted-on expression of absolute, unwavering delight. "Evenin'," he said, his voice a pleasant, folksy baritone. But the voice didn't match the smile. The smile was manic, but the voice was calm. The disconnect was jarring. Can I help you?" I asked, my hand still on the curtain. The man's smile seemed to get wider, if that was even possible. His eyes were wide open, fixed on me. And as I looked into his eyes, a cold, prickling fear began to crawl up my spine. He wasn't blinking. His eyes were wide, round, and perfectly still. The pupils were dilated despite the bright lights of the truck stop. They were like two black, glassy orbs fixed on me with an intensity that was both unnerving and deeply predatory. "Just wanted to say hello," he said, his voice still calm and friendly, a bizarre counterpoint to the screaming insanity of his face. "Seein' if you were enjoyin' your evenin'." I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing. Was this a prank? Was he on drugs? Was he having some kind of psychotic break? Every alarm bell in my head was ringing. This was not a normal human interaction. I'm fine," I stammered, my hand tightening on the curtain. "Just eating my dinner." The man nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. But his smile never faltered. His eyes never blinked. He just stood there on the side of my truck, beaming at me with that terrible, fixed grin. The bright lights of the lot glinted off his teeth, which were too white, too perfect. We stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. Me, frozen in my seat, staring at him. Him standing on my running board, staring back, smiling that awful, unblinking smile. The noise of the truck stop seemed to fade away. The world narrowed to just the two of us, separated by a thin pane of glass. I could feel a pressure building, a sense of imminent, terrible violence. It was like being in a cage with a tiger that was pretending to be a house cat. You know that at any moment the pretense can drop and the claws can come out. Then, as slowly and deliberately as he had nodded, he began to back away. He didn't turn. He just took a step backward, off my running board and onto the pavement. He kept his eyes locked on mine, his smile fixed in place. He took another step back and another, moving with a strange, gliding motion. He backed away into the darkness between the rows of parked trucks. He never broke eye contact. He never stopped smiling. He just receded into the shadows, his white teeth the last thing to disappear. One moment he was there, a beacon of terrifying cheerfulness. The next, he was gone, swallowed by the night. I sat there for a full minute, my heart pounding in my chest. I was drenched in a cold sweat. I slowly let the curtain fall back into place, plunging my cab into darkness. I fumbled for the door locks, making sure they were engaged. I didn't finish my sandwich. I didn't listen to the radio. I just sat there in the dark, my mind replaying the encounter over and over, the smile, the eyes, the unblinking, predatory stillness. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. It was a man. But he was a man who was wearing his humanity like a poorly fitting suit. He was a perfect imitation of a person, but he had gotten the details wrong. He had learned the words, but not the music. He knew that humans smile to show friendliness, so he had put on the biggest, most friendly smile he could manage. But he had forgotten to blink. He had forgotten to let the smile touch his eyes. He had forgotten that smiles are supposed to fade. I don't know what he was or what he wanted. Maybe he was just a lunatic. Maybe he was something else. But I know this. I have never felt a fear as profound as the fear I felt in those 30 seconds. It was the fear of the uncanny, the terror of looking at something that is almost human but not quite. It's the fear that there are things walking among us, things that look like us and talk like us but are fundamentally, terrifyingly different. And they're just waiting for you to let your guard down, to invite them in with a simple, friendly question. And all they have to offer in return is a smile that will haunt you for the rest of your life. My name is Sam Rodriguez, and I'm 40. The CB radio is a trucker's lifeline. It's our version of the office water cooler, our social media, our 911. It's a constant stream of chatter, a river of voices that flows across the country. You hear everything on the CB: road conditions, speed traps, bad jokes, heartfelt advice, and a whole lot of nonsense. It's company. It keeps the loneliness at bay. Most of the time, it's a comfort. But one night in the flat, empty plains of Oklahoma, my CB became a source of a terror so specific, so personal, that it made me want to rip the wires right out of my dash. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer, a reefer, full of frozen chickens from Arkansas to Colorado. The reefer unit on the trailer has a constant low drone, a sound you get so used to you don't even hear it after a while. It was a clear, moonless night, the kind of black that swallows up your headlights just a few feet beyond the beam. The highway was a straight, dark ribbon cutting through an endless sea of nothing. I was feeling the miles, my body stiff, my mind fuzzy. I decided to pull into a rest stop for a few hours of sleep. It was a small, isolated place, just a single building and a parking lot set way back from the highway. When I pulled in, I was the only one there. Not another truck, not another car, just me, my rig, and the humming of my reefer. I parked, shut down the main engine, and did my usual routine. I checked the reefer's temperature, kicked the tires, and then climbed back into the cab to settle in for the night. I left the CB on, turning the volume down low. It's a habit. The quiet chatter is like a white noise machine for me, a familiar murmur that helps me sleep. The airwaves were quiet that night, just the occasional burst of static, the faint, garbled voice of a driver miles away. I closed my eyes, and the drone of the reefer and the soft hiss of the CB began to lull me into a state between waking and sleeping. That's when I heard it. A voice cutting through the static. It was clear, too clear, as if it were coming from right outside my truck. Breaker 19 for Roadrunner. You got a copy? My blood went cold. Roadrunner. That was my handle. It's not a common one. I'd been using it for 15 years. I sat up, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I grabbed the mic. "This is Roadrunner," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Who's looking for me?" There was a pause filled with the sound of crackling static. Then the voice came back just as clear as before. "Good to hear you, Roadrunner. Just wanted to make sure you were settled in okay." The voice was strange. It was low and raspy with a weird echoing quality. It sounded like someone talking at the end of a long, empty hallway. And there was something else about it, a familiarity that I couldn't quite place. Yeah, I'm fine," I said, trying to sound casual. "Who is this?" Another pause. The static hissed and popped. Then the voice, with that same hollow echoing quality. "Just a friend. Saw you pull in. It's a lonely night out here. Gotta look out for each other." I looked out my windshield. The parking lot was empty. The single light over the restroom building cast a weak yellow glow. There were no other trucks, no cars, no headlights, nothing. "I don't see anyone," I said into the mic, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "Where are you transmitting from?" The reply came back instantly with a soft, chilling chuckle that seemed to crawl right inside my ear. "I'm close, Roadrunner. Real close. I'm over here in the restroom. Just thought I'd say hi." I stared at the small, dark brick building 100 yards away. Its windows were black. The door was closed. It was a silent, inanimate object. But the voice on my radio was telling me it was coming from inside there. This was impossible. A CB radio has a range of a few miles, but the signal is strongest in a line of sight. For a transmission to be that clear, that loud, the other radio would have to be very close. But for it to be coming from inside a brick building 100 yards away? It didn't make sense. The signal would be weak, garbled. This was crystal clear. "That's not funny, man," I said, my voice trembling. "What kind of game are you playing?" The voice came back, the raspy, echoing tone now laced with a kind of mocking amusement. "No game, Roadrunner. It's cold in here. The tile is cold. Why don't you come on over? We can talk face to face. My hand was slick with sweat on the plastic mic. This had to be a prank. Some kid with a powerful base station hiding somewhere in the dark messing with me. But the voice, it sounded so strange, so unnatural, and the feeling in the pit of my stomach was telling me this was no prank. I didn't answer. I just sat there, my eyes glued to the restroom building. The CB was silent for a long moment. Then the voice came back, and this time it was different. The mocking tone was gone, replaced by something else, something cold and hungry. I know you're alone, Sam. It used my real name. A jolt of pure, undiluted terror shot through me. No one on the CB knew my real name. My handle was Roadrunner. My name was Sam. The two were separate. I never mixed them. I dropped the mic as if it were red hot. It clattered to the floor of the cab. I stared at the radio, at the small, glowing channel display, as if it were a venomous snake. The voice came through the speaker again, no longer needing a reply. It was just talking to me now, a low, raspy, continuous monologue. I've been waiting for you, Sam. I saw you on the highway. I knew you'd stop here. You always get tired around this time. You always need a break. It knew my habits. It knew my routine. It's dark out here, Sam. So dark. But you're not alone. I'm here. I'm right here in the bathroom waiting for you. All you have to do is get out of your truck. All you have to do is walk across the parking lot. It's not that far. I was paralyzed, trapped in my seat by a fear so absolute it felt like a physical restraint. The voice continued, its hollow, echoing quality filling the small space of my cab. It was coming from the radio, but it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. Come on, Sam. I just want to talk. I just want to see you. It's been so long. That phrase, it's been so long. And the strange, raspy familiarity of the voice finally clicked in my brain, and the terror I was feeling coalesced into a single, horrifying realization. The voice. It sounded like my father who had been a trucker his whole life. My father who had taught me to drive. My father who had died of a heart attack in a lonely motel room in Oklahoma, not 20 miles from where I was parked 10 years ago. The voice on the radio was his voice, not his healthy living voice, but a distorted, broken echo of it, a voice that had been scraped raw by time and decay. Dad? I whispered, the word a choked, pathetic sound in the darkness of the cab. The voice on the radio chuckled, a dry, rattling sound like stones in a tin can. I knew you'd remember. Now come on, son. Come say hello to your old man. I finally broke. A scream tore from my throat, a raw animal sound of pure horror. I lunged for the ignition, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key in the slot. The engine roared to life, the sound a blessed, beautiful wave of noise that momentarily drowned out the voice from the radio. I didn't bother with checks. I didn't care about anything but getting away. I slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the gas. The rig lurched forward and I spun the wheel, turning the truck around in a tight, screaming arc. As my headlights swept across the restroom building, the door creaked open. For a split second, my lights illuminated the interior. It was dark, empty. But standing just inside the doorway, shrouded in shadow, was a tall, thin figure. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark, man-shaped silhouette, and from my radio one last, terrible, pleading whisper. Don't leave me here again, son. I drove out of that rest stop like a bat out of hell. I didn't slow down until I was 50 miles away, until the sun was starting to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of gray and pink. I pulled over on the shoulder of the highway, my body trembling, my mind a shattered wreck. I reached down and ripped the CB radio out of my dash, the wires sparking and snapping. I threw it onto the passenger seat as far away from me as I could get it. I sat there until the sun was fully up, the warmth on my face a small comfort. I don't know what happened that night. Was it a ghost? A memory? A psychic broadcast from a place of deep sorrow and loneliness? Or was it just my own grief twisted by exhaustion and the emptiness of the plains, manifesting in the most terrifying way imaginable? I don't have an answer, but I sold my rig a week later. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't be alone in the dark in the middle of nowhere. The silence of the road was no longer a comfort, it was a threat, because I know that there are voices in the static, voices from places we don't understand. And sometimes they're calling for you, and they know your name. Did you enjoy this story? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like this video. And now, let's begin our next terrifying tale. My name is Gerald Price, and I'm 56. I've been a trucker for most of my adult life. You see a lot of things on the road, enough to make you believe that the world is a far stranger place than most people give it credit for. But most of the strange things are distant. Odd lights in the sky, stories you hear from other drivers. It's not until something happens to you, until it gets up close and personal, that you understand what real fear is. For me, that moment came on a quiet night in Wyoming when I learned that the thin metal roof of my cab wasn't nearly as much protection as I thought it was. I was hauling a load of cattle, which is a job I don't particularly enjoy. The smell, the noise, it's a living, breathing cargo, and it adds a layer of stress to the drive. I was heading east, crossing the vast, empty expanse of Wyoming. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the world a canvas of black and silver under a brilliant star-filled sky. The road was a lonely ribbon of asphalt, and I hadn't seen another vehicle for the better part of an hour. The cattle were restless, their low moans and the occasional thud of a hoof against the trailer wall a constant, unsettling soundtrack. I was tired, my shoulders aching from the tension of the drive. I knew I needed to stop. Up ahead, a small sign announced a scenic overlook and rest area. It wasn't much more than a paved pull-off with a historical marker and a couple of trash cans, but it was set back from the road and felt secluded enough. I pulled my Freightliner in, the air brakes hissing loudly in the profound silence. The only other sounds were the continued shuffling of the cattle and the cold Wyoming wind whistling around my mirrors. The overlook was perched on a bluff, offering a sweeping moonlit view of the rolling plains below. It was a beautiful, desolate spot. I shut down the engine, and the silence deepened, broken only by the wind and my living cargo. I tried to settle into my sleeper berth, but sleep wouldn't come. The cattle were more agitated than usual, their movements more frequent, their moans more distressed. I figured it was just the strange place and the cold. I put in some earplugs, drew the curtains tight, and finally managed to drift off into a light, uneasy sleep. I was woken sometime around midnight by a sound. It was a low, heavy thump that seemed to come from directly above me. It was so loud, so close that it felt like someone had dropped a bowling ball on the roof of my cab. I sat bolt upright in the darkness, my heart instantly hammering. My first thought was that a piece of equipment had come loose, or maybe a large bird had hit the truck. I lay there listening, every nerve on high alert. The wind howled outside, a lonely, mournful sound. The cattle were silent, eerily silent. The constant, familiar noise from the trailer had completely stopped. That, more than the thump, sent a chill down my spine. Then I heard it again, a sound that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It was the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate footsteps, pacing on the roof of my cab just inches above my head. Each step was a heavy, solid impact, the kind of sound a man wearing heavy work boots would make. But between each step, there was a dragging sound, as if one foot was lame, or as if something heavy was being scraped across the metal. My mind reeled. This was impossible. The roof of my cab is a good 13 feet off the ground. How could anyone get up there, and why? It had to be my imagination, a dream, the wind playing tricks on me. Thump, drag, thump, drag. It was not the wind. It was not a dream. The sound was too real, too rhythmic, too close. It moved from the front of the cab directly over my sleeper berth towards the back. I could track its progress, each heavy footfall a physical blow to my sense of safety. My cab, my little metal sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap, a fragile shell with something heavy and malevolent walking on top of it. The cattle in the trailer started to make noise again, but it wasn't their usual lowing. It was a sound of panic, high-pitched, terrified bellows that were cut short with wet, gurgling sounds. A wave of nausea washed over me. What was happening back there? The footsteps on the roof stopped. I held my breath, straining my ears against the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. The silence stretched for an agonizing minute. Then a new sound began, a loud rhythmic creaking and groaning of metal coming from the back of the cab, near where the trailer was hitched. It was the sound of immense weight being applied, of metal being stressed to its breaking point. I had to see. I had to know what was up there. Fear is a strange thing. Sometimes it paralyzes you, and sometimes it makes you reckless. In that moment, recklessness won. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a big 4-cell mag light, and crept from the sleeper into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. I took a deep breath and flicked on my exterior lights. The powerful beams flooded the area around my truck, illuminating the gravel lot, the historical marker, the empty plains beyond. Everything was exactly as it had been. Normal. Empty. The creaking sound stopped the instant the lights came on. The silence that followed was absolute, save for the whistling of the wind. The cattle were quiet again, a dead, final quiet. I sat there for what felt like an hour, my eyes scanning the mirrors, my knuckles white on the flashlight. Nothing. No movement, no sound. I started to think I had gone crazy, that the solitude and the stress had finally broken me. Slowly, cautiously, I unlatched the door and pushed it open. The cold wind hit me, a shock to my system. I climbed out of the cab, my feet crunching on the gravel. The ground was hard, almost frozen, covered in a thin layer of undisturbed dust and grit. I shone my mag light up at the roof of the cab. It was empty. Just a clean, flat surface glistening with a thin layer of frost in the moonlight. There were no footprints, no scrape marks, nothing. My fear began to give way to a profound sense of confusion. Had I imagined it all? The footsteps, the dragging, the terrified sounds from the cattle? I walked to the back of the truck, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the darkness. I ran my hand along the side of the trailer. It was cold, solid. I reached the back, my heart pounding with a nameless dread. I shone the light on the heavy metal door of the cattle trailer. It was latched just as I had left it, but the top of the door, a thick slab of reinforced steel, was bent. It was bowed inward as if something immensely heavy had been pushing against it from the outside, trying to get in. Along the bent edge, the paint was scraped away, revealing long, deep gouges in the metal like claw marks the size of a man's hand. A cold, sick feeling washed over me. I unlatched the door and swung it open. The smell hit me first, the coppery, metallic scent of fresh blood, so thick it was almost gag-inducing. I shone my light inside. The trailer was a slaughterhouse. The cattle were dead. Not just dead, but torn apart, their bodies mangled in a way that no animal could have done. It was an act of savage, impossible violence. I slammed the door shut, my stomach heaving. I stumbled away from the truck, my mind refusing to accept what I had just seen. The footsteps, the dragging sound, the silence of the cattle, then their screams, the creaking metal, the bent door. It all clicked into place in a horrifying, impossible picture. Something had been on my roof, something heavy and strong, and it had tried to get into my trailer. It had succeeded. I looked around at the empty moonlit landscape. The gravel around my truck was pristine. There were no tracks leading to or from my rig other than my own. Whatever had been on my roof had come from nowhere, and it had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only destruction and a silence that was more terrifying than any scream. I didn't stay a second longer. I ran to my cab, started the engine, and drove. I drove through the rest of the night. The image of the carnage in my trailer burned into my mind, the memory of the heavy, dragging footsteps echoing in my ears. I reported the loss of my cargo as an animal attack, a pack of wolves or mountain lions. The insurance company was skeptical, but they paid out. What else could I say? That something had walked on my roof and slaughtered 20 head of cattle without leaving a single track in the dust? I don't know what it was. A monster from a storybook? A creature from another dimension? I don't have a name for it. All I know is that it was real, and it was heavy, and it was hungry. And sometimes, when I'm alone on a quiet stretch of road at night, I hear the wind whistling over my cab, and for a terrifying second I think I hear it. Thump. Drag. And I grip the wheel and drive a little faster, praying it's just the wind. My name is Travis Lee, and I'm 34. I'm a flatbedder. I haul oversized loads, the kind of things that make people on the highway stop and stare. Massive wind turbine blades, prefabricated houses, giant industrial tanks. It's a challenging job, but I like it. It requires precision, patience, and a constant awareness of your surroundings. You have to be in tune with your truck, with the road, with yourself. But what happens when you can't trust what you see? What happens when your own reflection betrays you? That's what I've been struggling with ever since a cold winter morning in Colorado. I was hauling a generator the size of a small bus from Denver to a mining operation in the mountains. The weather was turning, a big snowstorm was predicted, and I was trying to get through the high passes before it hit. It was early, the sun not yet up, and the world was a landscape of gray and white. The air was thin and bitingly cold. I'd been driving for a few hours and needed a break. I pulled into a rest stop just off I-70. It was a modern, well-maintained facility, but at this hour it was deserted. The parking lot was empty, covered in a thin layer of old, crunchy snow. The sky was a heavy, oppressive gray. I parked my rig, the only vehicle in the vast lot, and the silence that followed was absolute. I just needed to splash some water on my face, wake myself up before tackling the next leg of the journey. I jogged from my truck to the restroom building, the cold air burning my lungs. The building was warm inside, the hum of the heaters a welcome sound. The room was clean, sterile, and brightly lit. White tiles, stainless steel fixtures. It felt safe and normal. I was the only one there. I walked over to the long row of sinks, my boots echoing on the tile floor. I turned on the tap, the water steaming in the cold air. I leaned over, cupped my hands, and splashed the warm water onto my face. It felt good, chasing away the last vestiges of sleep. I did it again, rubbing my eyes, feeling the circulation return to my skin. I straightened up, reaching for the paper towel dispenser. I glanced at myself in the mirror that ran the length of the wall, and my heart stopped. The man in the mirror was not me. I stared, my hand frozen in midair. It was my body, my clothes. I was wearing my favorite faded blue work shirt, my company-branded baseball cap. The reflection was mimicking my posture perfectly, one hand still dripping over the sink, the other reaching for the towels. But the face was wrong. It wasn't my face. It was the face of a stranger, a dead man. His skin was a waxy bluish white, the color of a body that has been in the cold for a long time. His eyes were sunken, surrounded by deep purple-black bruises like the marks of a brutal beating. One of his cheeks was swollen and discolored, a dark, ugly contusion. His lips were thin and blue, slightly parted, revealing graying teeth. But the worst part was his eyes. They were open and they were looking right at me. They were cloudy, milky white, the eyes of a corpse. And yet they were looking at me with a horrifying, desperate intelligence. It was a look of pleading, of terror, of a silent, eternal scream. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My mind was a maelstrom of denial and pure, unadulterated horror. This was a dream. It had to be. I was still asleep in my truck. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them, my own familiar, tired face would be looking back at me. I counted to 3, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I opened my eyes. He was still there, the dead man. His bruised, broken face stared back at me from my own reflection. Nothing had changed. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I felt disconnected from my own body. I raised my hand, the one that was still dripping, and watched in the mirror as the dead man's hand rose to match the movement. The hand in the mirror was pale and bloodless, the fingernails tinged with blue. I touched my own face, my warm, living skin, and watched as the dead man's waxy fingers touched his own bruised, cold cheek. I stumbled back from the sink, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. The reflection stumbled back with me, its dead eyes never leaving mine. I was trapped in a horrifying pas de deux with a corpse that was wearing my life like a costume. Who was he? Where had he come from? Was this a ghost? A premonition? Was I seeing my own death, or was I simply losing my mind? The face in the mirror began to change. The slack, dead expression shifted. The blue lips trembled, and then slowly, horribly, they pulled back into a rictus grin. It was not a smile of amusement. It was a silent, screaming grimace of agony. The cloudy, dead eyes seemed to widen, the pleading look intensifying into one of pure, abject terror. It was as if he was trying to warn me, to tell me something, but was trapped behind the silvered glass, forced to wear a mask of death. That's when I broke. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound that was torn from the depths of my soul. I turned and fled. I burst out of the restroom and into the biting cold, not even stopping to close the door behind me. I ran across the empty parking lot, my feet slipping on the snow, my lungs on fire. I didn't stop until I was safely in my cab, the doors locked, my body trembling uncontrollably. I sat in the driver's seat, panting, my eyes squeezed shut, refusing to look at any reflective surface. Not the rearview mirror, not the side mirrors, not even the dark screen of my GPS. I was terrified of what I might see looking back. I sat there for a long time until the first rays of sun began to cut through the gray clouds. The light gave me a small sliver of courage. I needed to know. I needed to see if I was still me. With a trembling hand, I flipped down the sun visor. There was a small vanity mirror on the back. I took a deep breath and looked. It was my face. My own tired, terrified, living face. My skin was flushed, my eyes were wide with fear, but they were my eyes, my reflection. The dead man was gone. I let out a sob of relief so profound it felt like my bones were dissolving. I was me again. I got out of that rest stop as fast as I could. The predicted snowstorm hit as I was climbing the pass, a blinding whiteout that turned the world into a maelstrom of wind and snow. It was some of the most dangerous driving of my life, but I didn't care. I was just glad to be moving, to be putting distance between me and that place. I made it to the mining operation, delivered my load, and started the long drive home. The story should have ended there, a terrifying, unexplained hallucination. A story to tell, or more likely, to keep to myself forever. But it didn't end there. A week later, I was at a truck stop in Utah grabbing a coffee. I picked up a local Colorado newspaper that someone had left on the counter, and I saw it. A small article on page 3. Body found near mountain rest stop. My blood ran cold. I read the article, my hands shaking. A hiker had found the body of a man in a ravine, about half a mile from a rest stop on I-70. The police suspected he had been the victim of a robbery and a brutal beating, and had likely succumbed to his injuries in the cold several days earlier. They had released a photo hoping to identify him. It was him. The face in the newspaper photo was the face I had seen in the mirror. It was the dead man. The same sunken eyes, the same swollen cheek, the same expression of frozen agony. He was a tourist from back east, a man who had been reported missing a week before, a man who had been beaten, robbed, and left to die in the cold, just a short walk from where I had stopped to wash my face. I dropped the newspaper, a fresh wave of horror and a grief I couldn't explain washing over me. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a premonition. It was a message, a cry for help from a soul trapped between worlds, reaching out in the only way it could through a reflection in a mirror. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to be found. I never told anyone. Who would believe me? But the memory of his face is seared into my mind. I can't look in a mirror now without a flicker of fear, without half expecting to see his bruised, pleading eyes looking back at me. I was the last person he ever spoke to, in a language without words, in a conversation across the veil of death. And I am haunted by the terrifying, heartbreaking knowledge that for a few brief, terrible moments I wore a dead man's face. My name is Rick Daniels, and I'm 42. I'm a father of 2 girls. They're my world. Being on the road away from them is the hardest part of this job. Every time I see a family at a rest stop or a kid waving at my truck from a car window, I feel a pang of homesickness. Kids have an innocence, a light about them that can brighten up the darkest, loneliest places. That's what I used to think. Now I know that sometimes that light is just a lure. Sometimes the most innocent things can be the most terrifying. This happened on a run through the Midwest, somewhere in the flat, dark cornfields of Iowa. It was the dead of night, that strange liminal hour around 3 a.m. when the world seems to be holding its breath. The highway was deserted, and the only light came from my headlights and the faint ghostly glow of a crescent moon. I was tired. The kind of bone-deep weariness that makes your thoughts slow and syrupy. I knew I needed to pull over. I saw a sign for a rest stop and took the exit. It was a big, modern place, but it was completely empty. The parking lot was a vast sea of asphalt, my rig the only ship on it. The main building was dark, the lights off for the night. The only illumination came from a few tall security lamps that cast long, distorted shadows. I parked in a spot far from the building, a habit for quiet. I killed the engine and the silence was immediate and total. I was about to close my curtains and crash when I saw them. In the middle of the vast empty parking lot, under the cold, sterile glow of a security lamp, there were children. There were 3 of them. 2 boys and a girl, maybe between the ages of 8 and 10. They were dressed in simple, timeless kids' clothes, jeans, t-shirts, and they were playing tag. My first reaction was a jolt of alarm. What on earth were kids doing in a deserted rest stop at 3 in the morning? I looked around for a car, a minivan, an RV, anything that would indicate a family was stopped for the night. There was nothing. Just my truck and the empty darkness. I watched them for a moment, my tired brain trying to process the scene. They were laughing, but I couldn't hear them. It was like watching a silent movie. They chased each other in a wide circle, their movements full of the boundless, joyful energy of children at play. They darted and weaved, their small forms silhouetted against the pavement. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. This was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. The silence was the worst part, the complete absence of the sound of their laughter, of their sneakers slapping against the asphalt. It was a silent, ghostly pantomime of joy. My fatherly instincts kicked in, overriding the fear. These kids were in danger. The parking lot was right next to the truck lanes. What if another rig came pulling in and didn't see them? I had to get them out of there. I reached up and pulled the cord from my air horn. I gave it 2 short, sharp blasts. Brap, brap. The sound ripped through the silence, a deafening industrial roar that should have sent any living creature scattering. The children stopped. They froze in place, mid-stride, like statues in a game of freeze dance. The boy who was it had his arm outstretched, his fingers just inches from the girl's shoulder. The other boy was halfway through a turn, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. They stood there, perfectly, unnaturally still. And then, with a slow, synchronized movement that was utterly devoid of human spontaneity, they all turned their heads to look at me. The distance was too great to see their faces clearly, but I didn't need to. I could feel their collective gaze, a sudden, intense pressure that felt like a physical blow. The playful energy was gone, replaced by a cold, ancient stillness. They were no longer children playing a game. They were something else. Something that was pretending to be children. We stayed like that for a long, terrible moment. Me, in my cab, my hand still on the horn cord. Them in the middle of the lot, a frozen tableau of childhood, their unseen faces all pointed in my direction. The silence rushed back in, heavier and more menacing than before. I was about to hit the horn again, to scream at them, to do something, anything, to break the terrible spell. But then, they vanished. It wasn't like they ran away. It wasn't like they faded. One moment they were there, 3 solid, 3-dimensional figures under the security light. The next, the space they had occupied was empty. They were just gone, as if they had never been there at all. I stared at the empty spot, my mind refusing to believe what I had just seen. I scanned the entire parking lot, my eyes darting into every shadow. Nothing. The rest stop was as empty and silent as it had been when I first pulled in. I sat in my cab for the rest of the night, my heart pounding, my eyes wide open. I didn't sleep. I just watched the empty parking lot, half expecting them to reappear. They didn't. As the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky, I started my engine and left. I drove away from that place with a fear so profound it felt like a sickness. I've tried to explain it to myself. I was tired, I was hallucinating. I fell asleep for a minute and had a vivid dream. But it felt too real. The silence, the way they moved, the way they vanished. It was a structured, deliberate event. I think about my own girls, about their laughter, their energy, their light. And then I think about those silent, playing figures in the empty lot. I think it was a trap, a lure. A performance designed to draw in a concerned parent, a lonely trucker, a good Samaritan. What would have happened if I had gotten out of my truck? If I had walked over to them, my heart full of concern? I don't know the answer, and I don't want to. I just know that I saw something that night that was wearing the skin of childhood, but was hollow and ancient underneath. And now, when I see a playground at night, or an empty swing set moving in the wind, I don't feel nostalgia. I feel a cold, creeping dread, and I keep on driving. My name is Paul Green, and I'm 37. Every trucker knows the sound of their own rig. It's a symphony of clicks, whirs, and rumbles that you learn to read like a book. You know the groan of the suspension on a tight turn, the specific hiss of your air brakes, the exact pitch of the engine at 65 miles per hour. And you know the sound of silence, the specific heavy silence that falls when you turn the key and nothing happens. That silence is the sound of trouble. It's the sound of being stranded. One night in Missouri, that silence was the most terrifying sound I'd ever heard because it let me hear something else. Something that was in the cab with me. I was on a long haul carrying a dry van full of paper goods from the East Coast to Kansas City. It was a straightforward, boring run, the kind I usually like. I was cutting across Missouri on I-44, a road I've driven 1,000 times. It was late, after midnight, and a thick, soupy fog had rolled in, cutting visibility down to almost nothing. The world outside my headlights was a wall of gray. Driving in thick fog is mentally exhausting. Your eyes strain, your shoulders tense up. After an hour of it, I was shot. I saw a sign for a rest stop and gratefully pulled off the highway. The fog was even thicker here, away from the main road. The rest stop was a small, older one, and the fog swirled around the few dim lights, giving the place a ghostly, ethereal feel. I couldn't see if there were any other vehicles in the lot. It felt like I was completely alone, adrift in a sea of gray. I parked, set my brakes, and killed the engine. The silence was immediate and profound, muffled by the thick blanket of fog. I was too tired to even bother with my usual walk-around. I just locked the doors, drew the curtains, and collapsed into my sleeper berth. I was asleep before my head hit the pillow. I woke up a few hours later feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The fog was still thick outside, pressing in on the truck, making my small cab feel even more claustrophobic. I had a sudden, powerful urge to get moving, to get out of this place. It was an instinct, a gut feeling that the atmosphere had changed from peaceful to menacing. I climbed into the driver's seat and put the key in the ignition. I turned it. Click. Nothing. No rumble, no cough, no attempt from the engine to turn over. Just a single, dead, metallic click. I felt a spike of adrenaline. This was bad. I was in the middle of nowhere in a thick fog with a dead truck. I tried again. Click. And again. Click. The silence that followed each click was immense, a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was in that profound, unnatural silence after the third click that I heard it. It was a sound from behind me, from the sleeper berth I had just left. It was the sound of breathing. It wasn't my breathing. I was holding my breath, my body frozen, my ears straining. This was a slow, deep, ragged sound, a wet, guttural inhale, followed by a long, rattling exhale. It was the sound of someone sleeping, but a sick, troubled sleep. My blood turned to ice. I was not alone in the cab. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. Had a homeless person snuck in while I was asleep? But I had locked the doors. I always locked the doors. Had I somehow picked someone up without knowing it? Impossible. The breathing continued, a slow, steady, terrifying rhythm in the dead silence of the cab. It was coming from the bunk, from the darkness behind the driver's seat. I was trapped. The engine wouldn't start. The doors were locked. And something or someone was in the cab with me, just a few feet away in the darkness. To get out, I would have to pass it. To even look at it, I would have to turn around. I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was paralyzed by a fear so absolute it felt like my muscles had turned to stone. I sat there, rigid, my eyes locked on the gray, foggy windshield. I could feel its presence behind me, a weight, a pressure in the small space. The air grew thick and cold, and a faint foul smell began to fill the cab. The smell of damp earth, of decay, of something that had been left in the dark for too long. How long did I sit there? Minutes? An hour? Time ceased to have meaning. My entire universe had shrunk to the space of that cab, to the sound of my own frantic heartbeat and the slow, ragged breathing from the darkness behind me. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and wait for it to wake up. With a surge of pure, desperate adrenaline, I reached for the key again. My hand was shaking uncontrollably. I wasn't thinking about the engine anymore. I was thinking about noise. I needed to make a noise, any noise, to shatter this terrible, intimate silence. I turned the key again and again as fast as I could. Click, 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 click. The breathing behind me stopped. The sudden absolute silence was 1,000 times worse. The presence was still there, I could feel it. But now, it was awake, and it was listening. I held my breath, waiting. The silence stretched, taut and thin, ready to snap. I had the horrifying sensation of being watched, of unseen eyes fixed on the back of my head. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, I closed my eyes and turned the key one last time, putting every ounce of my will, my hope, my terror into the motion. The engine roared to life. The sudden, deafening explosion of sound was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. The cab vibrated, the dashboard lights flickered on, the radio started playing. The world came rushing back in a wave of glorious, life-affirming noise. The moment the engine started, the presence was gone. I didn't hear it leave. I didn't see anything. But the feeling, the pressure, the cold, the smell, it all vanished in an instant. The cab was just my cab again. I was alone. I didn't wait to find out what had happened. I threw the truck into gear, my foot slamming the accelerator to the floor. The rig lurched forward and I tore out of that rest stop, plunging into the thick fog, not caring where I was going, only that I was getting away. I drove until the sun came up, until the fog had burned off, until my heart had stopped trying to beat its way out of my chest. I pulled into a busy, brightly lit truck stop and finally allowed myself to stop. I got out of the cab and with a deep sense of dread opened the door to the sleeper berth. It was empty. The bunk was just as I had left it. The blankets rumpled from my sleep. There was no sign that anyone or anything had been there, except for one thing. On the pillow where my head had been, there was a damp, dark stain, and on the floor below it a small pile of damp, black earth, like the soil from a freshly dug grave. I never knew what was in my cab that night. A ghost? A demon? Some creature that hides in the fog? I only know that it was real, and that for a few terrible, silent moments I was trapped with it. The engine failure was not a coincidence. It was a trap. It was designed to strand me, to keep me there in the silence, to let me know I was not alone. I had the entire truck professionally cleaned, but I can't get the memory out of my mind. Sometimes when I'm in my sleeper berth at night, I'll wake up with a start, and in the silence between the rumble of the engine and the hiss of the air, I'll hold my breath and listen. I listen for that slow, ragged breathing from the darkness, and I pray to God I never hear it again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, let me know in the comments. Which one chilled you the most? Don't forget to like, share with your friends, and subscribe to Horror Whispers for more terrifying tales.